This video is sponsored by my Patreon. I've been trying to make Patreon my main platform for community recently, posting exclusive writing every week, audio movie reviews, updates on my documentary, and early episodes of my new podcast. That's pretty much all I have to say. It's only $1 a month, so go check it out. It's kind of a recent storytelling trend, in movies and TV at least, but I really feel like the concept might be relevant to reality right now. Sometimes it can feel like we're living in different universes. I think we as a culture are currently suffering from a starvation of shared rituals, but most people don't even really know what they're missing. I think it should be no surprise that our moment in history right now feels incredibly divided and difficult to reconcile. The freedom to choose our own narrative and stream of information brings about an increasingly isolated series of bubble colonies in an infinite multiverse of experience and choice. The Western world has always been a culture built on the bedrock of individual choice, but I think an increasingly interconnected landscape has also made the amount of individual choices and possible universes to live in practically limitless. Private schools, curated dating apps, church shopping, overtly one-sided news stations, our social media bubbles, they've all got individual choice in common, catering to our own preconceived worldviews and assumptions and moral imaginations. The fact that we have so many more options isn't a sin, but collectively, all of these options and possible choices kind of destabilize reality. Many children no longer have any community within walking distance, which further pushes them towards algorithmic connection online. Choosing a romantic partner now feels more overwhelming and daunting than ever, despite the limitless options of dating apps. The idea of a local, walkable parish church is mostly a thing of the past, which leads to these geographically sprawling church communities that are mostly united by shared opinions and preferences rather than shared day-to-day experience. And we don't need to elaborate at all about the destructive capabilities of our isolated news and information bubbles. But what if I told you that I think movie theaters might play a part in beckoning us back to a better world? I grew up going to midnight movie premieres. You know, when a movie would release on Friday and then the premiere would be on the Thursday night at midnight before that, and people would line up down the block the whole afternoon before just to get a seat. Big movies still open on Thursdays today, but now there's such a vast array of showtimes that most people don't go to the midnight showing. Like, they usually start at 3 p.m. for some reason, and then they go until like 2 a.m., and so people just kind of go to any one of those. Growing up though, I loved the ritual of midnight movies. I remember how exciting it was, how much anticipation there was. Sometimes my friends and I would take a nap before so that we'd be like fully awake by midnight. Other times we just stay up until then counting the hours. But I remember doing it for definitely many of the Harry Potter movies, the Hunger Games movies, the Iron Man movies. Yeah, it was a big deal. If it was something nerdy enough, like I guess at the time Harry Potter was, often a bunch of the people at the theater would have come dressed up in costumes and with their Harry Potter books to take photos with and ready to laugh and applaud and take photos together. And I still remember all of that experience with Deathly Hallows Part 2, where so many people were wearing costumes and so many photos were taken, and I think the applause lasted for like 10 minutes straight when the movie finished. Looking back, I think my last midnight movie premiere was Deathly Hallows Part 2, and it almost feels like a remnant of a bygone era. It almost felt like an era where nerds were still using internet forums as a staging ground for real in-person gatherings in the real world at conventions and movie premieres and book signings and all that kind of stuff, rather than what it is now, where those events are more like networking for an increasingly online existence. That all might be sort of a tangent, but my point is this. With the increased options for possible showtimes to attend, and the fact that some movies now just drop on streaming the same day they hit theaters, the ritual of midnight movie premieres has declined significantly. And on a much larger scale, the ritual of going to the movie theater has seen a massive drop in attendance in the past decade, sometimes for understandable reasons. Ticket prices, babysitting, food, global pandemics, the increased ease of access of streaming platforms, all of it has made people feel like going outside the house to see a movie isn't really necessary or cost effective. When people do leave the house to go see movies today, it's more so for movies that Martin Scorsese would call theme park rides, the type of spectacle-driven blockbuster that feels like it demands to be seen on the big screen. Anything below that bar, from romantic comedies to Oscar dramas to A24 indies to mid-budget thrillers, all of that is pretty much relegated to streaming in the comfort of a viewer's home. I made a list of movies that I feel like would not be successful in theaters today, but were like massive box office successes 20 years ago. Like, look at this list. Juno, Forrest Gump, The Sixth Sense, Saving Private Ryan, Twister, Home Alone, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Napoleon Dynamite, American Beauty, Fahrenheit 9/11. All of those were massive box office hits 20 years ago that drew millions of people out of their homes, off their couches to go to a theater. And today, half of those movies would flop in theaters and the other half would go straight to Netflix or HBO Max and join the hordes of content options that leave people scrolling for hours without deciding what they want to watch. In a world of infinite options on our TVs, to me at least, it can feel like the 10 or so movies playing in a movie theater at a given time are kind of like a welcome refinement of the potential palette. Even when it comes to watching things at home, the idea of watching something at the same time as everybody else, like the latest episode of Lost or the nightly news at 11 or American Idol at 8 p.m., that all feels increasingly alien in a world where we call the shots on what and when we want to binge. The shared ritual, the shared universe that we once inhabited with everybody else has been consumed by the limitless curation of reality through ease of access. The theater marquee becomes the ever-growing and overwhelming My List on Netflix. Radio stations become Spotify playlists. Don't get me wrong, super convenient things are gained, but foundational communal things are lost. In a world where everything is just another piece of content to consume at your own pace and leisure, ritual dies. Worship dies. Artistic reverence dies. Reality fractures. But movie theaters are just as magical, just as ritual, just as transcendent as they've ever been. Sure, I'll respond to the first thing. There are rude guests every once in a while, although I would argue that the new prevalence of reserved seating has kind of minimized that. And yes, movie theater tickets are sometimes expensive, but if you can use something like AMC A-List or Regal Unlimited or the newly resurrected Movie Pass, then seeing 1 or 2 movies a month will make it pay for itself. But I am firmly planting my feet in the camp that despite all of the hurdles and obstacles, theatrical experiences are still so much more than just a novelty. I believe that there are 3 things that make movie theaters miraculous even today. And those things might sound something like artistic reverence, worshipful submission, and shared reality through ritual. Artistic reverence is easy to describe, but increasingly hard to embody. I think in a world where we're constantly streaming everything and watching everything at home, it's led to this rise of armchair criticism and cinema sinning, where we watch things on our phone and our laptop, and we pause to go to the bathroom and make snacks, and we Google plot summaries and ending explained videos before the movie's even done, and never give it a fair shot to be experienced the way it was meant to be experienced, with any sense of reverence. We're living in this increasingly cinematically illiterate landscape, but everyone also thinks that they're probably much smarter than the artist who made whatever they're watching. In an era where the Hollywood elite are being jabbed constantly, and probably for very good reason, it might be heresy to suggest a slightly different way of viewing things, but I will. I think we need to bring back the sense of awe and respect and reverence for artists as the potential prophets of our era. And that means giving them time and attention in a world where those are commodities that every corporation wants to steal. It doesn't mean we have to like every movie we see or trust every artist's worldview blindly, but it does mean we should treat every piece of art as something sacred, to be taken seriously, made by a person with intention. And that leads us to the second part of it, the thing I'd call worshipful submission. It's the action of acknowledging something greater than ourselves, outside of ourselves, and for a brief 2 hours, allowing us to be taken on a journey of wherever it wants to take us, with awe and wonder. Jean-Luc Godard famously summed up the difference between movies and TV this way: when you go to the cinema, you look up. When you watch TV, you look down. One conveys respect and worship. The other conveys control. I read this film critic Jim Emerson elaborating on that quote, and he said this: "For a movie lover, the theater is a sort of temple, and the experience touched with religiosity. You look up in hushed awe at the screen, and the darkness dispatches all distraction, leaving only the light and sound emanating from the screen. And then there's the enveloping scale of the image. Most of all, you relinquish control over the movie by submitting to its unbroken and continuous terms, accepting its rules of temporality." I still remember one of the most powerful cinematic experiences of my life was when I saw Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life in theaters, and it was long and slow and torturous to watch. I was squirming in my seat throughout much of the movie, and there were moments where I was genuinely bored. I also think it's a masterpiece, and I definitely know that if I had watched that movie at home in my own house, I would have paused it to go to the bathroom, or I would have checked my phone, or I would have made snacks. And the fact that I was able to be forced to sit in a movie theater and just endure it was actually part of what made the experience so powerful. I was going through the torture and imprisonment that the main character in that movie was going through and unable to escape in the same way that he's unable to escape. And that was what was powerful about it, in a way that would never have happened if I had watched it at home. The unyielding pace of the cinema screen meant that it marched on in front of me, whether I liked it or not, and I was edified by it. I think for modern audiences, even sometimes for myself, the loss of control upon entering a movie theater is one of the things that deters them from the experience. There's no fast forward button, there's no pause button, you don't even get to control who sits next to you. But I would argue that the limitations placed on us by the theatrical experience are profoundly healthy and humanizing ones. It offers us the rare sacred space to give our undivided attention to something that has no practical takeaway or utilitarian function, but infinite emotional significance. And for someone with ADHD like myself, this forced concentration is unbelievably helpful. But beyond that, I think the submission and worship in a movie theater exercises muscles in our soul that long to connect with something greater than ourselves. When you snowball that experience through years and years of going to the movie theater, it breeds humility and childlike wonder and curiosity. And that brings us to what I think is probably the most significant one: shared reality through ritual. There's this philosopher, I'm probably gonna say his name wrong, but I think it's Byung-Chul Han. He wrote this book called The Disappearance of Ritual, and it's really, really good. Basically, he talks a lot about how the fabric of society has been ripped apart by the lack of sacred rhythms and shared rituals with each other, and he mentions the Jewish Sabbath as an example of a good one. The Sabbath demands silence. The mouth must be closed. Silent listening unites a people and creates a community without communication. The divine commands silence. Today's compulsion of communication means that we can neither close our eyes nor our mouths. It desecrates life. I thought that was really close to how one might describe movie theaters. He says this after that: rituals are symbolic acts. They represent and pass on the values and orders on which a community is based. They bring forth a community without communication. Today, however, communication without community prevails. The idea that movie theaters are a kind of community might seem like a silly one at first. I mean, most people see the people around them in a movie theater as kind of like a hindrance to their personal freedom to enjoy things the way they want to enjoy them. But even if the worst theatrical experiences, the ones you always tell your friends about when you say you don't want to go to the movie theater, might be because of other guests being annoying and impinging on your enjoyment, I also think the best theatrical experiences are because of other people too. Watching a comedy movie at home alone is just never going to be as effective as seeing it in a packed room with a bunch of people just as surprised by the punchlines as yourself. Even what Martin Scorsese calls theme park movies are named as such because they demand a big screen and excite an audience. And the worldwide theater reactions when Captain America lifted Thor's hammer in Endgame are proof of it. But I think the experience of watching a movie with other strangers in a cinema goes beyond just being in a football stadium and cheering at the same time. I still remember the first time I saw Parasite in theaters, and there's that scene where the guy who lives in the basement, his head slowly peeks over the stairs, and the collective chill and gasp that went through the entire theater was palpable. You just felt everyone tense up and go, ooh. And the funniest thing was, the second time I saw the movie, everyone laughed at that moment, which was really interesting to me. Like, the same moment was funny to one audience and deeply creepy to another audience, but either way, it was palpable. You could feel it. It was like there was something in the air. And when the movie ended and everyone compulsively clapped together after the journey that we'd all just experienced, it felt like maybe the world wasn't quite as divided as before. We were all just a little bit closer. I mean, certainly, if I had wanted to start a conversation with any of the strangers around me in the movie theater, I would have been able to do it, because that's what a shared movie theater experience creates. Steven Spielberg discusses all of this much better than me, so I'm just going to read one of his quotes that is so good. I've always devoted myself to our movie-going community. Movie-going as in leaving our homes to go to a theater, and community meaning a feeling of fellowship with others who have left their homes and are seated with us. In a movie theater, you watch movies with the significant others in your life, but also in the company of strangers. That's the magic we experience when we go out to see a movie or a play or a concert or a comedy act. We don't know who all these people are sitting around us, but when the experience makes us laugh or cry or cheer or contemplate, and then when the lights come up and we leave our seats, the people with whom we head out into the real world don't feel like complete strangers anymore. We've become a community, alike in heart and spirit, or at any rate, alike in having shared for a couple of hours a powerful experience. That brief interval in a theater doesn't erase the many things that divide us, race or class or belief or gender or politics. But our country and our world feel less divided, less fractured after a congregation of strangers have laughed, cried, jumped out of their seats together, all at the same time. Art asks us to be aware of the particular and the universal, both at once. And that's why, of all the things that have the potential to unite us, nothing is more powerful than the communal experience of the arts. It's so good, man. I don't even know why I made this video. I could have just read that quote. I think sometimes we're tempted to believe that community and connection only happen when we're looking at another person face to face. That's certainly what we tried to emulate when we would call with our friends and try to have a face-to-face conversation on Zoom during the pandemic. But we were looking at the camera to try to make it look like we were looking at each other, but we weren't. But while I think face-to-face community is very sacred, there's another aspect of reality that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle, and that is side-by-side community. Side-by-side community allows us to sit next to a person and engage with something outside of ourselves, outside of our own control. It takes relationship and makes it about more than just the exchange of our individual experiences and our already held opinions. As we sit shoulder to shoulder with others beholding something greater than ourselves together, we are given the gift of shared reality. And suddenly, after so much disconnection, we're inhabiting the same universe again. Thanks for watching.